I'm showing 6:02. I want to thank everybody for tuning in this evening. We have as our presenter for this Mountain Zoom, my colleague Hunter Romano. He's an extension agent up in Bland County, Virginia, and he's going to be discussing small ruminant winter preparedness. So Hunter, thank you for speaking with us this evening, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Phil. Just to give everybody a little background about me, I've been an extension agent since 2012. I actually worked with Phil for about 7 years in Wise County as the 4-H agent. And then about 2 years ago, I moved back to my home county to be the A&R agent in Bland. I've been a farmer my entire life, and for about the last 15 or so years, I've been a sheep producer. So before we get started, I'm not a complete expert on anything that I'm going to be talking about. This is all just stuff that my farm has done and that we've implemented over the past few years. So, you have to figure out what works for your operation and what you can handle as far as sizes of flocks and some of the other things that I'm going to be talking about. So when we're talking about getting prepared for winter, my thoughts on it are you prepared for a catastrophic blizzard to happen on your farm? Which means, do you have feed? Do you have shelter? And are you prepared if your lambing or kidding season is in the winter? There's pros and cons to lambing and kidding in the winter. A lot of people try to push that to the spring. Some people want to have their new animals then so that they can sell them by the spring. So some pros and cons for that are less parasites, less hoof rot. There's not a lot of fly strike, if any, depending on what kind of winters we're having here in the Appalachian Mountains. The cons for it are it's cold, and that's the biggest thing for me. I hate being out in the cold all night, birthing lambs or breaking up water. And then all the extra labor that you have with having to feed every day makes ruminants in the winter kind of difficult to deal with. So the first thing we're going to talk about is feeding. As you all know, winter in Virginia, Kentucky, West Virginia, Tennessee varies year to year. Sometimes we could have a really light winter where we don't have hardly any snow and there's still going to be some pasture available for our livestock. But then other years we can have weeks and weeks of 4 or 5 inches of snow. So that's what I mean by be prepared for a blizzard. When it snows like that, you have to provide forage for these animals. Otherwise, they're not going to do well. And any stress on their bodies from the weather can cause abortions and cause other issues, especially with sheep during this time. So the biggest thing is we have to deal with cold temperatures. That means the animals are going to be using a lot more energy every day to stay warm. That's not necessarily as big of an issue with sheep because they have a lot of breeds have wool coats that help them with that energy conservation. But goats will definitely need feed every day, even in a kind of a mild winter, because they don't have that insulation that a lot of wool sheep breeds have. So as you can see on the slide, sheep need about 2 pounds of good quality hay every day during winter months. And winter months for me is the beginning of December to the end of February. So, we do it in a kind of a free choice type of situation. We'll put out 2 to 4 square bales a day for our flock. We have about 30 head. So that pretty much takes care of them for a day. We'll put out 4 bales if we know it's going to be really cold or there's a lot of snow and no pasture available. 2 bales on, some of the lighter days.
Excuse me, Hunter.
Yeah.
I don't think your slides are advancing. Are they supposed to be?
No, we're still on this slide.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that.
No, you're good. For operations that, like I said, are lambing and kidding in the fall, you need to up that number of forage that's available for them, because ewes carrying lambs and does with multiple fetuses are going to require 200% more energy than, if they were not having any lambs or kids that spring. So we've got goats need 2 to 4 pounds of good quality hay. And then there also needs to be some type of grain offered to these animals, as well as free choice mineral, because they're not getting a lot of the forage that they would be getting in the summer. And here's just a chart that I kind of made of what I consider good quality hay or good quality forage. We do a native grass, mixed grass type of hay. A lot of people with sheep and goats will provide alfalfa, which is going to be higher in pretty much everything than native grass hay. And then, like I said, we offer corn grain pretty much every day during the winter for all of our breeding ewes, especially. And then here's just the percentages for my personal flock as far as hay, pasture, and then grain. Whenever it's not snowing, I would say around 25% of their food will come from foraging in pasture. We try to stockpile as much as we can in the fall and then turn our animals out into those pastures on nice days in the winter.
Hey, Hunter, sorry to interrupt again. I still think there's might be an issue with your slides, because I'm still seeing.
I'm clicking. What picture do y'all see?
I see the slideshow itself in the first slide, small ruminant winter preparedness.
It's definitely not going there.
I think he needs to hit from the beginning. I don't think it ever hit play.
Okay. Hold on 1 second. Did it change now?
No, it's.
I don't know what the issue is.
You might be able just to stop sharing and then share again, and it might open up okay.
Now did it work?
No, I'm still seeing the full slideshow and not the.
Oh, it is changing on my end. Let's see.
Okay, I see a slide by itself and it says topics.
Okay. Did it change?
Yeah, winter feeding.
Okay, perfect. All right, this is the slide we were on. I've completely lost my train of thought now. So 50% of the feed for my flock comes from hay that we provide for ourselves. We cut that every year. If you don't have the means to do that, you need to purchase that forage from somewhere so that you have it for your animals, once snow comes. And like I said, we stockpile some pasture. So on nice days, we will, we have that available for our animals as well. Depending on your acreage or what, type of situation you have as far as land use, you might need, this might be more than 50% of hay. It might be 75%, and then you're supplementing 25% grain until your pastures come back. The next thing we're going to talk about is shelter. There's a lot of different types of shelters people do for small ruminants, especially depending on the number that you have. We have a barn that is big enough to hold about 50 animals at a time. If you're not having lambs or goat kids in the wintertime, you don't need as much access to shelter, and you can kind of, right there at the top, I've got windbreaks as a type of shelter. So that could be tree lines, hills, haystacks, any type of wall that you put up, just so those animals can get out of the wind. Like the wind chill gets below zero, they're going to need a space to get away from that. Open air barns are also good, that they just give livestock a chance to get out of the wind, get out of, any type of wet weather that you have. It's also good for protecting your feed from the elements as well. I know when when it's snowing or raining in the winter, we try to put all of our hay inside so it's not getting wet and messed up outside. My sheep, I guess, are kind of fickle, and once hay gets wet, they aren't going to eat it. So then we've got to bust up another bale for them. We also have stalls in our barn. That's mostly, they're only used once we start having lambs. So we put our ewes in there to birth. They stay in there for a week or so with their lambs before they get turned back out with the flock. So, that's a personal preference. Some people just let their sheep and goats both have lambs and kids just out in the field. But, during this time of year, the elements can take a toll on your mortality rate of your new animals. And then, like I said, covered feed areas. We do have a couple of hay feeders that have little roofs on them to kind of keep that dry when we don't want to put it inside the barn. Another thing that's difficult, especially with shelters, is the amount of labor it takes to keep them clean. Pneumonia can be a big time issue in ruminants when they're in a confined space for a long period of time, especially if it's not ventilated well. You've got a lot of ammonia and manure that builds up pretty quickly. And if there's not a lot of ventilation, pneumonia is something you're going to have to deal with. The last thing, and probably the biggest thing for me, and I did a presentation on this probably this time last year for the Mountain Zoom series, is lambing and kidding. Preparation for this time of the year is of the utmost importance. Don't wait until you start having lambs and goat kids on the ground to kind of come up with the stuff that I have on this list here. And these are all just like main things that I try to have on hand, and that's iodine, old rags. We use small dog coats sometimes if it's really cold to put on lambs to kind of help keep them warm at night. Colostrum replacer, milk replacer, bottles, ear tags, rubber bands. And then have a plan, especially if it's going to be bad weather, there's a storm coming. If you have any animals that you think are about to give birth, they need to be in shelter. They need to have access to water and feed and all of those things while they're, having babies. And then be prepared for late nights and early mornings in the barn or field. I know my personal preference is if I know that I'm about to have lambs at some point, I can hardly sleep. I'll stay up till midnight. I'll get up at 4 a.m. I'll be in the barn every couple of hours just to make sure I don't miss anything and to make sure there's not any problems that you might need to intervene and help with. Here we have winter lamb and kid care. These are the three main things to think about during this time of year if you're having babies. The birthing process, pretty much with mature ewes and does, you don't have to do a lot or help a lot. Most of the time there's no issues, and they kind of know what they're doing, and unless there's some sort of a freak accident, they can pretty much do it on their own. I always try to keep a special eye on ewes that are first time lambing. They can get their lambs out. Sometimes they'll leave them to freeze, sometimes they won't clean them off, and they kind of just don't really know how to be mothers yet. So we try to definitely get those pinned up so that they'll kind of bond with their lambs. We can make sure that those lambs are nursing and getting colostrum as soon as possible. And that's our next thing here. Make sure that any new babies that you have get that colostrum as soon as possible, especially when it's cold. I know I spend a lot of time personally watching lambs after they've been born. It takes hours and hours out of my life because I wait for them to stand up, get cleaned off, and then start nursing. More often than not, instincts take over for the mom and the baby, and they figure it out pretty quickly. Make sure that the babies get that first drink as soon as they can. Once they've got that colostrum and they know how to get to the milk, you know, you kind of can lay off a little bit and not have to worry as much about what they're doing. And then my checklist for this is make sure the babies are standing up after, 15 to 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes, and looking for the udder at least. If they're making noises, and, kind of letting their mom know that they need to be fed. The best way to figure out if a lamb is going to be or is becoming hypothermic or whether or not it's nursed in the last hour or so is if it has a warm mouth, ears, and nose. If you feel those parts of the head and they feel cold or they feel chilled, that's a time that you need to take that lamb in and warm it up because it's getting way too cold out there in the elements. And then the last thing is an attentive mother. If your ewes or your does are not paying attention to their new babies or they're not receptive to nursing, then you need to intervene and make sure that that baby's getting milk every couple of hours at least for the first few days. So here are just some typical winter problems that, everybody runs into. The first one is water. Water needs to be available all the time. Livestock don't like ice cold water. So if you have any way to heat it up a little bit, that is helpful. They're eating a lot of dry feeds in the winter, unlike, the wet grass that they're eating in the summer. So having water available at all times is crucial. The next thing, and we discussed it before, is pneumonia in young and adult animals in those confined spaces. So that's, the buildup of ammonia, manure. Any barn space that you use needs to be well ventilated. And then we just talked about hypothermia. If, you're feeling on your newborn lambs or kids and they've got that cold nose, ears, and mouth, then they are becoming hypothermic and you need to do something about it. And then something that I run into, we have pretty much a dirt barnyard and it freezes up in the winter and we get a lot of stubbed up legs and animals limping around all the time. So that's something else to kind of pay attention to because eventually those animals can get to where they don't want to get up or go to feed or go to water. And, you need to try to loosen up those muscles in some way so that they're getting everything that they need. And then our final thoughts are make plans early. That includes plans for feed, plans for birthing, plans for shelter in the event that, we get 20 inches of snow. Come up with a backup plan. Make sure you have all your supplies, feedstuffs on hand. And then remember, winter is unpredictable. You really need to keep track of the weather. That's something that changes hourly in my area for sure. So definitely something to keep an eye on. But at this time, does anybody have any questions or comments or anything that I haven't covered that you want me to answer? And if you want, I can go back to my first few slides that y'all didn't get to see. This one. No questions?
Hunter, I know you were still living in Wise County several years ago when we got that really bad February.
Yes.
And I know a lot of our livestock producers learned that they would qualify for some funding if they lost livestock through the USDA Farm Service Agency. But one thing that a lot of them did not do is get pictures of the dead livestock. So that's something to keep in mind. I guess if there's an event, a blizzard, and you lose livestock, the Farm Service Agency would need pictures and dates in order for you to get some funding from an event like that.
Yeah, everybody, if you have an operation where you're trying to actually make money at it, you should definitely get registered with Farm Service Agency. Not only because of the livestock, but with forage as well. You can get insurance on your hay and make some money back that way. Especially if you have any losses in hay in the summer, you can use those funds to purchase hay that you didn't get to make.
I don't know if you can see the chat box since you're in the presentation, but Christy asked, how do you keep water hoses free of ice?
Well, I don't typically use water hoses in the winter, actually. We do a lot of catching water whenever it rains or when we have snow melt. We have a lot of water reservoirs around our barn. We also have streams close to our barn that we carry water from. But in times when we have had to use water hoses, we hook it up and unhook it every day. So once you're done using it, unhook it, drain the water, and then it's more labor, but plug it back in the next day when you need to use it.
You're getting some thank yous, Hunter, for the information.
Yeah, I can see those.
All right, any other questions for Hunter?
Here's another slide. I don't know if I can make it there. There we go. This slide that y'all probably didn't get to see either. This is basic stuff. We use a corn-based grain for our livestock. So, you know, different people can come up with their own mixes and stuff that they like better, but this is generally what we go with. Well, this is a quiet bunch tonight.
Let's see. Looks like a comment from Maria. RV Supplies has treated cords for water hoses. And Chrissy has a question.
Oh yeah, I see that now.
Okay.
What do you plant for forage and when do you plant it? So we just cut native grass. We have a lot of orchard grass, fescue, timothy that we fertilize and lime every couple of years, and we just make our own square bales. A lot of people that have sheep in my area will plant some pastures of alfalfa. That's a good hay for pregnant ewes and pregnant does. I don't like the maintenance that goes into having to grow alfalfa, so we just stick with native grasses that are in our county. And I just thought of something that I got asked the last time I did this presentation on ruminants. Pregnancy toxemia is another thing that can happen especially in the winter with pregnant ewes and does. And this can be even more of an issue if you don't have good quality hay that you are giving them. So toxemia is an issue with a negative energy balance in the animals. They can sometimes become anorexic from it. It can cause abortions. It's hard to diagnose. And by the time you have diagnosed it, those animals can, pretty much already be dead or not be able to come back at all. So that's something to watch out for during the winter, especially if you are going to be birthing lambs and kids during that time. How do you determine when a ewe or doe will go into labor? So with sheep, it's a little more specific, but goats is pretty similar. You're looking at about 5 months. So 145 to 150 days, you're going to have lambs or does. With us, we put a marker on our ram in the fall whenever we are going to do our breeding. Once the ewes have been marked, we put it on the calendar and then we just count the days. So we have a pretty good idea of when our sheep are going to go into labor. If you don't do that, or you don't want to deal with your ram and putting a marker on him every year, that just goes back to paying attention to your animals, checking on them frequently. If you have a ewe or a doe that seems perfectly healthy and they are, I call it nesting, they're nesting in a barn or away from the rest of the flock, then that's a pretty good indicator that they're probably starting to go into labor. Check back on them in a couple hours. Maybe you can see that the water's broken and that there's a water bag coming out. But if you're not going to do the marker, that type of stuff is just things that you have to notice by checking on your animals as frequently as possible.
All right. With no other questions, Hunter, thank you again for speaking with us this evening.
No problem at all. I enjoy it every time.
Good job.
Shad, our next Mountain Zoom will be what, next Tuesday?
Next Tuesday, and it's on home energy conservation.
Okay. John Ignash from Virginia Cooperative Extension, he will be speaking with us. And this will be recorded. It'll be available from our Facebook page, also from our YouTube channel. You can just go to YouTube and search for WISE VCE, and you'd find this if you need to go back and review this. But thanks everybody for tuning in tonight, and I hope everybody has a good evening.
Thank you all.
I'll see you at the meeting on Friday.
Yeah.